Hello everybody and welcome to SVG Zoom, Pan and Drag and Drop. This is another SVG focused episode where we break down and implement how to zoom at a point, pan your SVG and use a slightly easier version of drag and drop. We're going to be implementing this using Angular, but if that's not your cup of tea, you can easily apply the same principles with a little work to vanilla JavaScript. At the end of this episode, you'll have coded out a zoomable, panable, drag and drop SVG and understood the principles behind the functionality. You'll need Visual Studio Code and Node.js installed on your machine. So let's get right to it. So the easiest way to get started is just to pick up from where we left off in the last video, which was the drag and drop with Angular part 2. There's a link there to the GitHub. So if I open that up now, and then make sure that if you download, you're on the master branch, grab that and grab the code, download a zip, and that will pull it down, and then you can just open that guy up. And I've already extracted it over into this folder here, so I will spare the pain of doing that again. Once we're in here, we can either open Visual Studio Code from the context menu, or if you want to do it from the command line, you can do it just like so, and that should open up a Visual Studio, and there we go. So next thing we need to do is just make sure that this is up and running with all the npm packages. So let's open up a new terminal and we will run an npm install on that, npm I for install, and then let's just let that one run. Okay, so that's installed. Then let's just start the Angular server up and running. So npx ng serve -o for open, and let's just wait for that to fire up now. Okay, we'll use another port, that's fine. I think I've got it open somewhere else. Let's just wait for that to compile. Okay, and we're back where we left off before with the familiar drag and drop. So let's make things a little bit easier by just removing the clutter, and we'll get rid of everything except for this blue triangle. So I'm going to put these two windows side by side so that we can see what we're doing. And let me just expand to the folder. So we are working with the template, which is in the app component.html, which is the markup we see here, and then the code for that is in app component. So let's just remove the red triangle, we don't need that one anymore. Off you go. And then let's put this guy right in the middle, shall we? So since it's 100 wide and 100 high, let's put it on 200x 200y, and then that should put that bang in the center. So the next thing we want to do then is start adding the zoom in. So to do this, we're going to be using the mouse wheel event, and to do that, let's go into the code behind here, and we'll write a function which will handle when the mouse wheel is turned. So let's just put that just slightly above here, and we're going to call it mouse wheel. Oops. And it is going to be a function that will take an event just like the pointer events, but this time it's a mouse wheel event. So we'll call it wheel event, and it is of type wheel events. Super. Okay, so from that we can get where the wheel event happened. So we want the x and the y coordinates inside the SVG, so where it was that you zoomed, because we want to zoom to a specific point. So let's get the zoom x, and let's say that is the wheel event, and it's the offset x is the property we want for that, and the zoom y similarly, let's say that is the wheel event dot offset y. Super. And let's just be consistent with our variables. And we also, zoom X. We also don't want to the event to propagate, so let's just make sure we stop it right here. So stop propagation. Perfect. Okay, so that's the first step, and let's just console this out at the moment, just so that we can see that it's working. Let's take the zoom X, I'll put that in here, zoom X, like so, and let's do the same with zoom Y as well. Zoom Y and console that out. Okay, so save that, and that will refresh, and then let's try zooming again on this. And okay, nothing's happening because we haven't actually told the SVG specifically that we want our event handler to fire. So to do that, we need to add in the wheel event here. So wheel equals, and then the name of the function. So we called that one mouse wheel, and then it's the event that we want to pass over. Super, and from that we should be able to get our X and Y. So let's pull up our console as well so we can see what we're doing. And let me just dock that to the bottom of the screen. Can I do that? Kind of. Let me just put that down here manually and move it over into console and move this guy so that we're just taking up half of this. Move that over a little bit. Okay, perfect. So now let's try scrolling, and we can see that we get our events. And if I move the mouse further up the screen, you can see that the X and the Y coordinates are smaller. If I move it down the screen, we can see the X and the Y coordinates are larger. Okay, so far so good. We know we're handling the mouse wheel, and we know we've got the place where we started scrolling. There's another event that we want, which is called the delta Y event of the mouse wheel, and that's which way you're turning the wheel. So let's say a little bit further down here, mouse, let's call it delta Y equals wheel dot delta Y. Okay, and that should give us the direction that the wheel was scrolling. And let's just output this one as well and save that. Okay, and now if I start scrolling again, you can see we've got a delta Y of minus 150. So that's scrolling at one direction. If I scroll at the other direction, we've got a delta Y of 150. So positive 150 for the mouse wheel of one direction, negative 150 for the mouse wheel of the other direction. Not sure why it's 150, to be honest. We don't really care. We just want to know whether you're scrolling forwards or backwards. So that's cool. So we can handle that just by saying if it's greater than 0 or less than 0. And then with that we can determine whether we're zooming in or out. So the next concept we need to understand is viewbox, and I've done this amazing Photoshop diagram here to illustrate that. So you can see I'm quite the artist, but hopefully it will illustrate the point. So we've got our SVG here, which looks much like the SVG we've been working with. But in this case we have got it embedded in this beautiful looking web page where I've stolen the graphics. On the left we've got like a 200 pixel margin for our SVG from the left, and then from the top we've got a 100 pixel margin as well, and then we've got our SVG bounds here. Our SVG is 500 pixels wide and 500 pixels high, and I've also drawn the local coordinates in here. So we want to be able to pan the content around inside this, but we don't want it to bleed onto the rest of the web page. So we want this to be our window, and then inside the window we want to be able to pan and zoom the content. So we can do that. I'm using a clipping mask here in Adobe Photoshop, but it's the same effect. So I can move the content around inside here, and our content doesn't end up onto the rest of the web page. It kind of gives us a clipping mask window, so we can pan our stuff around. We can look at different areas of the content, and we can also zoom into it as well. So in effect, we're just making the content large, and then we're just kind of looking at a specific area. Sorry, that was me doing the Photoshop. We're looking at a specific area in a lot more detail, but the rest of the actual SVG content is hidden because we're constraining our view to this view box, which gives us the window into our content. Okay, so I hope that was made some sort of sense, and I hope you weren't appalled by my Photoshop diagram. So moving on. Okay, so back in the code, let's add a view box in now, and then we will play with it and just see what it does. So view box, and then we want to say what size the view box should be. So at the moment we're looking at a 500 by 500 HTML, a 500 by 500 element inside the HTML. So we can make the view box the same size. So 0, 0, 500, 500. So that shouldn't make any difference at all at the moment. We should see exactly the same thing. But now if we look up inside the actual markup itself, we can see inside the SVG that we've got this view box here. So I think one of the nicest things about SVG and why I use it is that you can actually play with it on the actual declarative markup. So if I make it 500 by 250 and 250, and let's see what that does. So that's effectively halved our display area by just showing us effectively, if I bring my amazing diagram back again, by just showing us 250 pixels of the actual underlying content itself. So we see that area inside the dotted line there. So we get this effect. If I change the coordinates from 250, from 0, 0, which is like the origin of the top left, 250, 250, and all 250s, then that moves us down. So the part of the content that we're looking at is just this square here. So we start at 250 over, we're 250 down, and we're looking at like a square area of 250 by 250. Okay, so with that then we can start to implement some sort of zooming, and we know that we can pan by changing the first two numbers. That will move it over, and we can zoom then by changing the last two numbers. Let's change those back to 500, 500, and that's our zoom. Okay, fine. So let's also do another thing, and let's give ourselves some more grid lines as well. And let's just reset this back to 0 and 0. Bam. Let's give ourselves. Let's make sure that we've got 2,000 pixels worth of grid, so that as we pan, we can see where we are. Okay, so the next part then is we want to be able to get this view box in our code and do something useful with it. So the way we do that is to use the actual grid element SVG itself, and we can pull the viewbox attribute out of that. So let's say, for example, we want viewbox X, viewbox Y. So these will be the first two numbers that we used, which will be the 0, 0, and then we want the other two as well, which will be the width and the height. So viewbox width and viewbox height, and we're going to use the SVG grid that we created a view chart for. So we need to use the native element and the get attribute method on that, and the attribute we want is this one over here, which is the viewbox. So get attribute viewbox. Okay, and doing that, we should be able to unpack into these 4 variables, and let's just log that out, shall we, just to see that we're definitely getting those. Viewbox X, and let me just copy and paste this. Viewbox Y, viewbox width, and viewbox height. Oops, there we go. So let's just check that out. So on our mouse wheel event, and let me just hide that. We should. Okay, so where are we? We've done a boo-boo. Okay, sorry. I see what I've done. Let me just pull this out for 1 second and put that down here, like so. Comment it out. Let me also just comment this out, and let's just call this view box, and then let's just console that out as well, and then we can see exactly what it was that I did. So viewbox, viewbox. Let's check that that works. Turn the mouse wheel. Okay, viewbox is null. Okay, so what does that mean? It means it means that I spelt it with a capital B, great, and then I went to try and get it with a lowercase b. So okie dokie, let's try that again. Okay, so we got it now. That's great. So viewbox, that's the correct, and let's just put that back, and because that's a bit annoying, and let's just try and be a little bit consistent about it. Viewbox, viewbox. Okay, Control K and S for save all in Visual Studio Code. Does it work? Perfect. Okay, good stuff. So now what we want is each individual one of these numbers, because at the moment we've basically just got a string of these 4. So let's split them up. So to do that, we can say we can do a split on it, and then let's split it by space. So these have all got a space in between them. That's fine. And then what we're going to do is we're going to turn them into floating points numbers, so that we can actually do some numeric calculations on them, which isn't much fun in strings. So let's just go to pass, and we want float, and then we will say s, which will give us hopefully the 4 items that we can unpack into these 4 variables, and we don't need that anymore. We know we're getting the viewbox. Great. Now let's console log these out. Hopefully we should have the 4 floating point numbers which represent the 4 parts of the view box. So let's just check that works. Okay, and zoom in. Okay, perfect. So we've got those. Okay, so we've now got our view box and we can start manipulating those numbers now, and then start manipulating them in and then set the values, and that will allow us to do zooming and panning. So let's just do the easiest thing first. What we're going to do when we zoom in, we're going to zoom in just right in the middle of our SVG, and we're going to zoom in by like 50%, and let's just to prove that it works, and then we'll build it up from there. So the delta Y was the direction of the zoom. So I think for that we can say let's just call it zoom direction, and then we can say something like, if the zoom direction is greater than 0, then we know we are zooming out. So we can say the view box width equals the view box width divided by 2. Okay, super simple. And then we can also say the view box height equals view box height divided by 2 as well. Okay, and what's that giving me? Squigglies. Okay, so there we go. Super. And then let's do the same for the opposite direction. And we will just say else. And I don't need that guy. And we will say multiplied by 2 rather than divided by 2. So that should basically make the view box twice as big or twice as small. So that's fine. So once we've done that, then we need to set those attributes again. So we've changed the numbers. Now we need to put them back into the actual view box attribute. Then let's just build up that string again, which was our view box, the view box attribute. We can say the scale, const scaled view box, which is going to be the view box that we made out of our 4 variables. So we've changed the width and we've changed the height, and then we want to say let's map it, and rather than having crazy floating point numbers, which JavaScript is kind of fond of for doing divisions, let's just make sure that we've mapped it to a fixed precision of floating point, which is like, let's just make it 2. So let's say S2 fixed, and let's just make sure it's just 2, otherwise it's going to be crazy. And then let's join that. So we'll join those 4 variables and we'll put them back into a string, which will be separated by the space. Okie dokie. Then the last thing to do is then to actually set this attribute here. So we can say this dot svg grid dot native element dot set attribute, and then the attribute that we want to set, or the thing we want to set it on, is our view box, all lowercase this time. Let's not do that again. And we want to set the scaled view box. So that should do it. And it's just worth pointing out here that I haven't put commas in here. Actually, we can omit these commas inside here, and it still works exactly the same. I think sometimes for me it's like, especially with a lot of SVG, it just makes it a bit more readable if it's got the commas in there, but don't need it. So let's save that and try that again, and hopefully now when we zoom it should go in and out. And what have we got? We can see the numbers are changing. but it does look exactly the same. So what's going on there? Okay, so my mistake. I apologize actually. I think I got slightly confused about the attribute names on this. So it turns out actually viewbox does have to have a capital B, or it doesn't work. So where I was setting it here, with a lowercase b, it doesn't know what that is. It has to be a uppercase B viewbox, and also where I get it up here needs to also be uppercase B, and in the markup it needs to be viewbox with an uppercase B, like so, or it doesn't work. It's the wrong attribute name and the SVG won't recognize it. So okay, stupid mistake to make. Let's try it again now. Okay, so as we can see, it's kind of that's quite a massive scrolling jump, big step, but it works as we expected. Super basic, proof of concept. So now let's move on to try and make it a little bit more usable. Okay, so let's step by step make this, start improving this. So the first thing was the massive jump that we got. So let's try and make this a slightly smaller step. So to do that, let's in here, let's just add in, let's say zoom. Let's call it a zoom scale. Zoom scale, and let's say it's 1.1, so it'll be like within a tenth of the previous value, or if you're zooming the other direction, 9/10 of the previous value. So the jump when we scale each time we move the mouse will be comparatively smaller. Okie dokie. And then when we're actually doing the scale down here, let's just say times zoom scale there, and then zoom scale here. So rather than halving it or doubling it, that should give us a slightly better, smoother zoom. Okay, so that's good. Okay, so the next thing I think we should do is, rather than zooming at the top left origin, let's start moving the zoom out. Let's do the next easiest thing, which is just zoom right at the center of the box. So sorry, quick lunch break there. So I'm back again. You may have noticed a change of shirt, so don't be disconcerted. Same ugly face, different shirt. Right, so let's look at this. What happens then if we zoom in the center? And going back to the most beautiful Photoshop diagram ever, there are a couple of things. So if we zoom in the center, and let me just do this so we can see that the whole thing expands. So the margin on the left moves over further left, and the margin on the right moves over further right. So we've got a kind of effect where our SVG is being translated horizontally, and we're doing both the horizontal translation left, and we're also increasing the size. So it then becomes something like, let me just grab a tool, and something like this. So the actual distance to the side of the page is now smaller. So this distance of 200 pixels is now going to be something like 150. So we need to say, okay, so move it over left, and we also need to say that this width of 500 pixels, we want to say, okay, so for that, let's make that, it's going to be 600, 500, yeah, 600. So two things: change the margin to the left, and also increase the size. So we've got two things then if we're zooming from the center. And also one thing to notice is wherever we are zooming from the actual point, for example. Let me just try and move this so it's actually centered. We notice that everything expands uniformly around that point. So if I look, for example, if I bring up my rulers, going to bring up rulers. Where is it? View, rulers, and then we can see, okay, so let me put one there and put one there. So everything expands uniformly from the very center. Now, so what would happen if we were zooming from somewhere else? So, for example, this point up here, right in the middle there. We would want then we could see that this is actually like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. This is about 2/9 across. So we would actually probably want this point to remain constant in the middle. We don't want that point where the mouse is to move at all. That's going to be like our origin of zoom. So we want it to stay there. So we can say, even though the actual size of the content is expanding, we still want the proportions to remain constant. So let's say, for example, this side here is going to be like, let's say that's like 20% of the distance, and then on the other side we're going to have like 80%. Move that over there, and that's going to be our 80. But as we zoom further and this box actually gets bigger, let me just do that so I can get the right layer. And let me expand this so it's bigger. Let's say we've zoomed more. Actually, even though the pixel size is going to be different for this, the actual percentages are going to be the same. So it'll let me do this. Let me just move that over there and save that, and then on the other side let me also move that over there. Come on, Photoshop, you play nicely with me. Let me move that over there. Let me save that. So even though we've changed the actual size, it's still 80% and 20%. So we could, just as long as we keep the proportions, the point that we're zooming from should remain constant and doesn't kind of jump around and move around at all. So we can calculate that point by looking at the overall size of the content and the size of the SVG, and then just see what the proportion is, and we can work that out from there. I hope that made sense, because those are the maths that we're going to be dealing with, so I hope visually that makes some sense. So let's do the coding then for that. Okay, just to make this a little bit more obvious, I'm just going to declare another couple of variables here. Let me call these the scaled viewbox width, scaled viewbox width, and let's scaled viewbox height, and then let's also do the one for let's scaled viewbox viewbox X, and let's scaled viewbox Y. This way I think it's just a little bit more obvious the things that we've actually changed. So I'm going to change these down here to scale viewbox width. Sorry, scale viewbox width. Do this one, and then let's change these down here as well, and then we'll do scaled viewbox height, scaled viewbox height, width, and scaled viewbox height. Okay, so we can actually see these are the things that we've already scaled, just a little bit more obvious. But you could keep them as you were, keep them as they were if you wanted to. So let's then have a look at changing the actual X. So go for the simplest case. Then we are expanding the box out, the content out, and we want to translate the X by, if we're scaling in, negative half of the delta of the actual scaling distance. So we can say for that, so scaled view box X. So this is going to be the actual original place that we started off from. So that's going to be, let's pull this back in. And pull that down there. And let's just hide some of these guys so we can see what we're doing. Get rid of that 20%, get rid of that, get rid of that. So let's say we started from this position here. Because we're scaling from the center, we know that we're going to be expanding 50% on the left and 50% on the right. So let's do that just to make it obvious. So we're going out this way, and also, oops, there we go. We're also going to be going horizontally, but vertically, but let's just look at the horizontal. So that's the position we start at, and then as we zoom, we will get a extra. Bear with me. Let me just try and duplicate this. It's slightly slimline. It will move out to that size there. So we'll have a delta then in the middle between the position that we started at, or the zoom state we started at, and the zoom state we ended at, which is just going to be this little bit in the middle there. That bit, it's a little bit large, but yeah. And it's going to be on all sides of the original square. So let's do that in the code. Close the Photoshop. So viewbox X, the place we started from, plus, we're going to want to say, so the width, viewbox width, and we want to take away the scaled viewbox width. So that should give us the delta between where we were before and the new scale distance, and then we want to divide that by 2, because we are going to be moving we're going to be moving half the distance across here to the left. So yeah, let me just pull this down. So that should give us our X, and let's also do that on the other side as well, for when we're zooming back out again. So this is going to be in the opposite direction, so it's going to be negative. Okay, let's see if that works if I zoom in now. Not quite. Okay, so bear with me. Okay, we've not changed the viewbox X to scaled viewbox X. So let's see what that does. Okay, that's gone a bit crazy. Okay, so not quite there. So actually, we need to change these around, because otherwise the difference will be incorrect. So let's just do that. Okay, so it's the vertical alignment we haven't changed yet, but the actual box stays vertically in the center, which is what we wanted. So it expands uniformly left and right. So let's also do the same then for the vertical component as well, and then that should keep the square bang in the center as we're doing it. And after that, we can just change the proportions of the fraction of the left and the right side of the zoom to see where it is that we need to scroll from. Okay, so let's do the scale viewbox Y. Scale viewbox Y equals, so it's going to be the viewbox Y plus actually it's pretty much the same thing. So we're going to take the viewbox height minus the scaled viewbox height. It's going to do the delta and then divide that by 2. And then on the other side we do exactly the same thing. This time remembering to swap these around, otherwise it'll give us the negative of that. Yeah, that should do it. So scale viewbox Y, and then make sure that we are using that in the transform. Oh, sorry, in the viewbox. Save that, and that should now keep it in the center. No, not exactly. Viewbox Y, scale viewbox height minus viewbox height, viewbox Y, viewbox height, scale viewbox height. And of course, yeah, sorry, that should be negative there. So that should fix that. So let's try that. Okay, that's good. So the square stays right in the middle. So this is the effect that we want. Wherever we've got the center of focus, we want that to be the origin of the zoom. And at the moment it's 50% left, 50% right. So if we were to move a mouse up to the top 25% left, 25% right, we want that point to remain fixed and everything else to zoom around that. So let's start coding that right now. Okay, so there are a number of ways that we can get the fractional amount that we've kind of moved the mouse, or sorry, the origin of the zoom inside the view box, the fraction of the distance from the left to the right. But the easiest probably way to do it is just to divide the length and the height of the actual view box itself, sorry, of the SVG itself, by the horizontal and the vertical position of where the mouse is. That should give us a fraction, and from that we can then zoom from that point. So that's going to look something a little bit like, let's just pull this down here. Actually, sorry, let's just start this here. So we can say, let's call it zoom left fraction. So let's zoom left fraction equals, that's going to be our zoom x. So this is the point where our mouse is, and then we want to see how big that is, or what the ratio of that is to the entire length of the SVG. So to get that, we can do the this SVG grid, native element, and then we want the client width. Where are you? Client width. Okay, so that should give us a fraction, and let's do that same for the top as well. So let's zoom, let's call it top, I guess, fraction, equals, and it's going to be the zoom y divided by the, actually it's the same, isn't it? This dot SVG grid dot native, oops, native element, and we want the client height. Excellent. So that should give us those, and let's just output those actually, just so we can see where we are. Console.log, and just say zoom left fraction and then the zoom top fraction as well. Okay, and let's just see if that makes any kind of sense then in the console. So let's start right from the beginning. We should, if I put my mouse right in the center, it should be roughly about 50-50. We could see zoom left fraction 0.94, zoom top fraction 0.942, and then if I move my mouse right up to the top, it should be a lot smaller number. There we go. So this one is here 0.09, 0.08, so it's about a tenth. So that's fine. We can work with that. Actually, it should be quite a lot easier actually if we then just take the left fraction and we remove this 2 and replace it with the zoom left. Take the top fraction and replace that, and then do the same here as well for the opposite zoom action. That should give us both of those, and you never know, that might even work. So let's try from this position here, which is what, 100, 100. So if I zoom here, that point should remain fixed, and no, nothing ever works first time. And just looking at, actually the reason is because we were dealing with dividing by 2 rather than multiplying by 0.5. Obviously that number is wrong, so we are now need to multiply by a fraction. So that should almost probably 100% maybe work. Let's try that. Okay, that's good. That's good. That's looking a bit more like it. The point where the mouse is zooming from is remaining constant. So if I move my mouse to the top left-hand corner of this box, the thing should zoom. But that, if I can get my mouse right there, well, we can zoom right in, and that shouldn't really move. So maybe ever so slightly with the fractional offsets. So okay, so that's pretty good. We've got zooming at a point. So now let's move on to doing the pan. I hope that all made sense. If not, drop something in the comments and I will endeavour to do maybe a slightly better diagram than the Photoshop.